It's Reality Check with Craig Price.
I'm an idiot.
4 minutes in and I'm already wrong.
I'm like a monkey. Hello, look at me.
You're like a beautiful mind. I'm more like Forrest Gump. So it's,
Craig Price is the man.
I knew it. Craig, shut up.
It's Reality Check with Craig Price. This week, friend of the show, Michael Domitrz, returns to talk about his new book, Can I Kiss You? Thanks for listening. As you might be able to tell, I did not just reach puberty. My deeper-than-normal tone is my annual signal that I have come back from the National Speakers Association convention this year in Phoenix. I never lose my voice when attending normal conventions for clients, basically because my clients don't try to outshout me, and I'm never in a room constantly full of loud talkers. Usually I'm the loudest talker, and if I keep my bass line, I'm fine. Thankfully, in the coming weeks, you'll be able to hear the occasional vocal damage, as well as some great in-person interviews I did there. And this week's guest is no exception. Mike has been on the show a couple times, and as always, after listening back to the interview during the edit, I am more awkward than usual on this year. Talking sex is not something I normally do, it's not something most people normally do, and certainly not in public to be recorded for all time. But whenever Mike has a new project, and in this case his new book, Can I Kiss You?, which is out today, based on consensual sex, both in dating and as you'll hear, in marriage, I have to have him on no matter how awkward it may be for me, or for you listening to me. He truly does important work trying to prevent sexual assault and educate people on how to communicate with their partners, be it their first encounter or 30 years of marriage. So let's hear me get seriously awkward with my friend and colleague, Michael Domitrz.
Mike, it's great to see you. I'm sorry about my sexy voice, but I figured I'd do it just for this podcast because we're going to be talking about sexy things.
Well, it's perfect timing, Craig. Thanks for having me back on.
And you're the kind of person I don't want to have on because what you talk about shouldn't be happening. But of course, we are dealing with centuries of not just culture, but I think also some horrible innate human instincts at times. I think some of the bad behavior that happens is really like in the wild. You know, a lion comes up on a lioness, and they don't really say, "Hey, can I kiss you?"
Right.
They
Well,
don't.
what's interesting is, though, the wild actually honors the dating rules, the mating rules, better often than human beings do. They have mating rules, and they tend to stick to them. Now, that doesn't mean that there's always respect and there isn't violence in the wild animal kingdom. But humans, many people have said, have a more of a historical track record of defying the concepts of boundaries and dating respect.
Yeah, so as of course, if you've recognized the voice of Michael Domitrz, good friend of mine, he always here. Like I said, every time we come here, it's an awkward conversation for me because I don't have kids. So we've talked about teen dating. We've talked about your other book that you have. You have a brand new book called Can I Kiss You? And so, not having kids and having a permission-based sex life for the last 12, 14 years with my lovely wife Heather, who's probably just turned a different shade of white as I said that sentence.
But I bet you do.
Yeah,
I bet you do, though.
I do.
Right. It's just we don't talk about that in marriage. So, for instance, I bet the two of you, because you have a healthy relationship, can talk about whether you're in the mood.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. I mean,
Right.
Like I said, it's permission based. It's
Right.
not like because there's this medieval thought that a wife has to obey her husband whether she wants to or not, and you watch Game of Thrones, which is not what I would call good dating advice, but a lot of it is just like they tell the concubine or the new queen, hey, just suck it up and just tough it out, and you'll get all this power and you'll be in charge.
That's correct. And for so long, people forget how young, as far as historically it is, that women weren't property. For how long women
9,
were
10, 12. It's crazy.
it's been happening in our history for a long time, and then you also take into account that we didn't discuss gender, sexual identity, other than heterosexual relationships, and then how those roles play in. It's not been discussed, and therefore there's this big vacuum out there on how to have all these discussions.
So with the husband situation, as I diverted you onto Game of Thrones, which happens a lot with me, which I call, Patton Oswalt calls that boobies with a chance of dragons. It's how do we get especially, and there's some cultures in the world till today that women are property or in what they call it, chattel. How do we get out of that mindset of it's a traditional that when you get married, that doesn't matter if you're in the mood or not, you're part of your marital duties.
And it goes down to what does respect mean in your relationship? And so when you look, we'll start here in the United States and pivot there. What does respect really mean? And for a long time, respect meant things like provider, protector. And that's how people started to define. And so people said there are gender roles, and they created these roles. And so if you have a heterosexual couple, you would say that the man was supposed to be the provider, these stereotypes, and the protector. And the woman was supposed to be the caretaker. Now, where that leads to disaster is when it comes to sexuality. Because if he is the protector and the provider, there's a dominance concept there. If she is the caretaker, that means it's her job to take care of the other people's needs. Therefore, there's not an equality there. There's not really an understanding of respect at all. And that's where this all grew out of, that leads to the problems we still have today, where people think, well, men are more sexual, and therefore they're going to act this way, which is just malarkey. It's ridiculous. Gender does not have to do with how sexually assertive you are or how much you want to be sexually active. Sexual orientation does not define that. Sexual identity does not define that. But it's these roles that have existed for so long that people take for granted that this is the way it must be.
Because I know that slut shaming, as they call it, is the biggest problem I think women have, because they're not allowed to say, I like to have sex.
Yeah,
And
right.
Because if they are, even if it's, they're monogamous, and monogamy is another construct that we've created, and whether you agree with it or not, and I certainly do if my wife is listening, I got to make sure that I don't get any trouble. But she's not worried about me. I'm the kind of guy that she's like, nobody's really shopping at that store. She's like, I got those goods. Those goods are locked up. I'm not worried about anybody. It's like having an old car.
It's called a healthy relationship.
Well,
She trusts you.
It's also like having an old car. You don't really leave the doors locked because no one's going to try to steal it.
Right.
So,
but trust does that.
yeah.
Right.
Well,
That's what trust does.
Well, and so now, as I try to cover my ass in this interview, with the slut shaming, is there another term that you use, or is that something that you use? Because
that's a common term that is used, and it's the idea
I don't
that
feel it's correct though, but it's the only term I know. So, I'm
So
trying to find out.
what it is it's a lack of saying that a specific gender cannot have a sexual voice, and if they do, we will degrade them for doing that. That our culture will do that, and that is still there today, strongly there.
It's super strong.
It's prevalent in music. It's prevalent in all over the place. Here's an example of where you can see how we treat, as far as heterosexual couples, men and women differently when it comes to alcohol and sex. If a woman is drunk with her husband and they're amongst friends, what will the average male friend say to the guy whose wife is drunk, tipsy, and a little all over him that night, as far as how they're viewing it, that she's more sexually assertive at that moment? What are the guys saying? Give her another drink and you're going to get what?
Yeah. Oh, sure.
You're going to get lucky.
Yeah,
Keep
sure.
it going. You're the lucky one tonight.
I
Now,
just don't want to
here's-
answer these questions because it makes me feel like I'm part of the weasel guys.
Right. No, it's just what we see in our culture. It doesn't mean you
absolutely.
believe it. But you almost never hear of wives saying, get your husband another alcohol and you might get lucky tonight. Yeah. And so it shows
There's a
you.
concept that you don't need to.
Right.
And that what bothers me is
Here's the interesting part about that, right? You just said to your buddy, you can't have sex with your wife sober. And nobody pauses on that. Nobody pauses and goes, how messed up is that? That we think his only or best chance is when she's not fully sound mind to make a decision. That his wife would not want to have sex with him sober unless she's intoxicated. How messed up is that concept? Now, we also have the whole paradigm there that we're talking heterosexual, and that's a percentage only of our culture and leaving out so many others. But the idea that for somebody to have sex, their partner must be drunk. What does that tell you about you as a human being if that's the case? It's sad.
Because that's not even a married couple. That's if you can see that in college at a bar.
Yep.
It's not even like they're trying to purposely get them drunk. It's just a matter of
That's right.
It's more of, oh, hey, now that she is drunk, whether it was intentional or not, or they're just out, that this is a chance for you.
Right. Well, and whether it be she or he, that's correct. And you mentioned Can I Kiss You? And people say, oh, is that for our new book? Is that for teenagers? And when you bring up this conversation, married people have the same struggles. Married people that married 30 years. Why? Because they grew up in the same culture as teenagers. And in many ways, today's teenagers are growing up in a healthier sexual culture than their parents and their grandparents. So the married people sometimes need this even more than their teenagers, for instance, because one partner, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, or identity, one partner was taught not to have a sexual voice. The other partner was taught that was their job to have one. So what happens? You have an incredible disparity. I meet people when I get off stage, whether I'm in front of a military audience or universities, military audience, somebody who's been married 30 years will come up to me and say, today was the first time I realized I should have a voice in the bedroom. Married 30 years. They were never taught that. Now, here's the catch. What did they teach their children then?
If anything.
If anything.
Yeah, because my sex talk was as we dropped my brother off at college. My mother, as we drove away, rolls the window down. And is like, I hope someone told you about condoms. And we just go. And she wasn't talking to me. She was talking to my brother.
Right.
Because I never got to talk. So, I think it's just difficult for people to talk about it in general.
Oh, I'll give you another example.
So even if they get a healthy revelation, like the lady or gentleman you're talking about,
right,
will they actually transfer that knowledge to the kids? I don't think so.
Well, here's the good news. I do think so.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and here's why I think so. Because when you see that light bulb go off, they never want to go back to who they were 30 seconds before that revelation. And they want to make sure we hear it from them. They want to make sure their children don't ever live in that culture they were raised in, because they realize how much of their sexuality was taken away from them by not being able to have a voice. They don't want that. And it shows up so many ways. I'll give you the other extreme. I had this is an email I got a month ago. So people think, 10 years ago, things were different. A month ago, I got an email, and it was from a man who said, wait a second. You're telling me that if I go into my bedroom at night and my wife is naked in bed, that I'm not going to automatically get sex? What world do you live in? Now, that's today that email was coming out a month ago. And people realize that can't be true. Yes, it can, because we have a culture that doesn't talk about it. So somewhere he was taught that, and so was his partner, that these were their roles. And if we don't start talking about this openly and upfront and give people the skill sets they need, and that's critical, giving people the skill sets to have a voice, for their partner to have a voice, for it to be fun, for it to be sexy, for it to be passionate, to understand that consent is the greatest form of sexual intimacy, mutually amazing consensual intimacy. We're going to keep heading down this road, and it's a scary road.
Well, you said that you think they're healthier. The kids today are in a healthier environment. But to see, it's like,
I should back that up. I don't think they're in a healthier environment. I think that there are more opportunities for them to get the skill sets than have ever existed in the past.
Absolutely.
Because you're bringing up a good point. The environment is not necessarily healthier.
Because what I was going to say is kind of relates to in a way, and let me go with it. When you hear it, you may be like, wait a second, it's not even close. It's like police violence. We see more of it. It's the same amount of police violence that's always existed. We see more of it now because there's cameras, and more people are quote unquote getting caught doing it. Where we hear about all these kids, these teenagers doing horrible things at drunk or spiking drinks or doing all these things. We hear more of it now than we ever have before. But is it because people are reporting it, or it's actually happening more? So I don't think it's happening more. I just think we're just people hearing about it more.
That's correct. What's happened is because we provide an education, survivors know that there's a place to be supported and come forward and be heard. And if you're a survivor and you realize I have a chance to be heard now and believed, and 30 years ago I didn't think I'd be believed, so I wouldn't come forward, you never knew this was happening because nobody ever talked about it. It's not on the survivors. That's on our culture, who never created an environment that helped survivors come forward. Now we have education, we have efforts out there saying we're going to support survivors. It's one of the things we do. We're going to teach people how to support survivors. And survivors realize, you know what? I deserve to have closure. I deserve to have support. I deserve to live my life and be me. I'm going to come forward. For whatever reason that survivor chooses, I'm going to come forward. And now we're hearing about it. Something that's been happening forever. Because of the courage and the strength of survivors and the support system there, we're hearing. And that's a good thing that we're hearing. It's a horrible thing that is happening. But good thing that we're hearing, so we can start saying, look at what's going to happen if we don't fix this system.
Well, it's more horrible that it happens and no one ever finds out. That's the worst part. So the fact that it's going to happen, well, like I said, this awful, again, talking to you is very difficult because every sentence I say makes it feels awful. It's true because, like I was going to say, it's going to happen whether we talk about it or not, which is a horrible thing to say, but it's true.
It is true.
So it's much more important to have it happen and we find out about it so we could possibly prevent more later on.
Right. When it's going to happen. Well, not when it's going. When it happens, we always want a culture set up to support that survivor. That's the key. That's really critical. And so we do have to acknowledge it's going to happen. And here's the horrible part of this, culturally right now with parents, is they don't want to have these conversations because they think if they do, somehow it'll lead their children to being more sexually active.
Yeah, they think it's a horny switch.
Yes.
We talk about sex, even if it's in an awkward, weird way that we know the kids are not going to be turned on during this conversation. But
Right.
somehow we've given them permission to just go crazy.
That's right. And that's what they believe. And it's ridiculously untrue and false and mythical, actually, because your children already have those feelings because they're human beings. That's all they need to be. And people go, I say, hey, do you remember being in high school? And people go, well, maybe I didn't have those feelings in high school. All right, do you remember the people who did? Because you certainly knew people did. But I mean, most people I know go, I didn't take high school. It was middle school I remember having those feelings. Exactly. And you're not having the conversation, which means your child or your nieces, your nephews, your grandchildren, where are they turning to? The internet, which means they're turning to porn, which is one of the most unhealthy places they can learn about sexuality, consensuality. They're turning to an awful, or they're turning to other 15-year-olds who think they know what they're talking about because they've seen the mechanics, but do not understand the emotional level of intelligence that's needed, the knowledge, the comfort, the trust, the loyalty. They don't understand any of that. And so we have a really dangerous setup. It's why whether you're a grandparent out there, a teacher, or your parent, or you're somebody who works with young people, you should have an interest in this issue. It's amazing to me how many times a national news story breaks and everybody's outraged over a rape case. Outraged. And I turn to them and say, so what conversation did you have with your children when you got home that night? And their normal one is, oh, don't go to that party. Don't go see, did you see what happened? Don't go to that party. Instead of, okay, let's talk about what went wrong there. Don't blame the victim for going to the party or the survivor going to the party. Let's talk about how nobody stepped in. Let's talk about how that perpetrator intentionally set up a horrific crime upon another human being, the degradation of another human being. Let's talk about how awful that is, and never say you didn't deserve to go to a party and be free like everybody else in this country.
Well, let's go with what I hear a lot from people who say, well, that's great, but the reality is that you shouldn't put yourself in situations regardless. So they are basically blaming the victim.
They are blaming
almost
the victim.
always blaming the woman for even being there,
Or a male survivor.
Or a male survivor,
exactly.
yeah.
Yep.
But I like they talk about, if you're going to dress like that, you're advertising. When it's like, but logically, you're like, well, yes, you are kind of like, if you were going to walk through a den of lions, you wouldn't be wearing a meat dress, right? But if the lions eat you, it's the lion's fault.
Let's pause it right there.
But it's the lion's fault.
But let's pause it right there. The lions wouldn't need you to wear a meat dress.
That's exactly right.
If you walked in front of the lion when it's hungry, you are now its meal, regardless of what you're wearing. So the lion is actually still the same example. Here's what we always tell people. If you're going to try to blame the dress of the victim,
just the attitude, like they're just...
we'll go with dress, though, because
Okay.
that's one people use a lot. If you're going to say that dress is what causes rapes to happen, then here's a question I ask. What do perpetrators wear? Because since dress causes rape, then the clothing of the perpetrator must have caused that person to rape. So please tell me what every perpetrator is known for wearing. And then let's tell people not to wear any of that clothing so they don't become rapists. How ridiculous would this argument sound?
Oh, when you throw logic in, because a lot of people just go with their gut feelings.
Right.
And especially, you get a lot of mansplaining. No offense, because you're not doing that. I'm talking about adult men who have daughters who say, I wouldn't want my daughter to do that.
That's right.
Or my favorite one is, if a guy shows up acting like this, I come out with the gun and talk to him. It's like, that just means you're protecting your property.
That's correct.
And you're treating women like property, even though you're trying to do what you think is in the best interest, but that portrays an image that she's property. She's your property. Until a man marries her, it's your job to protect them with guns. And that means that every guy that walks in the door is a potential rapist?
Yeah, and here's the way I always explain it. How come when 100 college students go out on a Friday night and the case we hear about in the news, of those 100, one of them, let's say, has a case that comes forward, and they say, well, they shouldn't have been dressed that way. How come the other 50, let's say let's say that this audience, gender-wise, was 50% men, 50% women. How come the other 49 men did not assault? Why? In other words, the clothing had nothing to do with it. The person who chose to assault assaulted. The alcohol had nothing to do with it because the other 49 did not assault, even though that victim had the same amount of alcohol as they did with the one they would have had with the same number with the 49. So how come how much that victim danced did not cause the other 49 to assault that victim? Why? Because it never had to do with any of those things. It was the one perpetrator who made all the choices.
And where is the education for young men? Because I think that's the biggest problem, is that boys will be boys, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, and it's all about what girls need to do and what girls, how they got to behave and all this stuff. When I think we kind of teach men or young boys when they're trying to be men that it's okay to do this. Because I live in Texas. I'm not from Texas, so this is not my culture. But I think I may have even talked to you about this before. I have heard more than once from guys, maybe they're not friends, but at work, acquaintances, they're talking about when they were growing up, and they're like, oh yeah, my dad took me to the border town, and I lost my virginity to some, prostitute, and that's a rite of passage. To me, that is crazy and quite disgusting myself, because that's teaching him that women are property, and that as long as you put money down, like take him on a date, which is basically, to a lot of people, transactions. I hate when they do that too.
Yeah, it's a messed up. And the example you gave means that Dad just said that being a man is defined by having sex. Now, to prove I'm a man, I have to keep getting sex. So I'll get it however I can get it. So the dad just taught domination, because that's what male I was taught meant to be a man or to be a male. It's completely messed up. You were asking, how do we teach men? What I love about what we did differently with this book, with Can I Kiss You, is we tore down the gender roles completely in this book. So if you open this book and you read it and you identify as a man and you're reading that book as a male, anywhere in there you could be any character. If you identify as a female, or your gender is a woman, any story you read, you could be either character. There's no breakdown of sexual identity. Any sexual orientation can read any story and go, I'm that, or I'm either character. Because here's what we have to learn to do as a culture. We have to remove the gender roles while acknowledging they exist culturally so we can see them and understand how they're having an impact. We need to remove them from how we make our choices so that we teach our young men, young women, all genders, all sexual orientations and identities, that be a good person over be a good man, over be a good woman. Be a good person. And what does that mean to be a good person sexually? See, when you remove the gender, then it's all different. Then you go, well, it means to respect your partner. What does that mean? Well, that means to respect their boundaries, their likes, their wants, to listen. Okay, so if they don't want to do what you want to do at that moment, what does that mean? That means I don't pressure them. I don't ask them why not just to get them to a yes. I don't do any of that. Well, what if you're a woman? Same rules. Or what if you're a man? Same rules. Oh, so now we're getting to where no matter who I am as a person, I understand that I'm going to ask my partner what they want it, how they like it, what they don't like. They're going to ask me, and we're going to have a blast being able to be there, totally present for each other, and be able to do for each other what we want. How much more fun can that be?
And you were as Dateline, right?
Yes.
You were on that fantastic special. It was a year or two ago. My question is, because one of the things they showed was, it really took a lot of effort. It finally did happen, but it really took a lot of effort for the bystanders to speak up. Even when they tried to speak up, it was more like it was incremental. It was like they started off like, maybe I should, or they whispered to their friend, not to the person, but to their friend, because they're trying to figure out what to do. How can we teach people to, because I think a lot of times when that happens, it's so awkward, and you can tell it's so wrong, that your brain doesn't know what to do. Because I mean, I've seen people, you're out in public, and if you see another spouse fight and they smack the other spouse, it's like, well, I know that's wrong right away, but do I get involved? And at some point you do, but it's like you're shocked. You don't know what to do. And during your special that was on, they had several instances where on purpose they tried to show you that.
That's right. Yeah, that was July of 2015.
So it was
2015.
just,
Yes, that was. Yeah, they did a great job of showing that.
You did a great job.
Well, I appreciate that. The show was my kid would never do that on Dateline. And here's what we do in the new book. That once again, one of the reasons we want to do this was to show this. Here's what we have found over the years of working with audiences around the world is a lot of people know one of two things in a moment of bystander intervention. The problem is they don't know both. They either know why they should intervene, and they want to intervene, but they don't know how. So they're so afraid they do nothing, they freeze. Or they know how, but they don't have the right motivation to put it into action. And so they're sitting there going, well, I could do something right now, but that's none of my business. As if other human beings don't matter. As if caring for another human being doesn't matter. And so the key to changing our culture to one that is one based on people intervening is giving people the why and the how-to. Most parents give the why and do not give the how-to on bystander intervention. What most parents do is say, that's wrong, stop it. If you ever see that, intervene. They don't teach how. So the kid gets there and goes, oh my gosh, it freezes because they know it's wrong, but they don't know what to do. So they're being laden with guilt of, I should do something, but I don't know what to do. So they have guilt, but there's no action. So one thing that we teach is, hey, here's 3 steps you can take that are very applicable that most people could easily do. In fact, we say, get a group together. Like you're there to party with friends, go get a couple friends. Now confidence soars. Now you feel more comfortable. You don't have to be confrontational. Give the precise how-to.
So before I let you go, I want to leave on a positive note because, we see with the Stanford rape gets 6 months when, believe me, if he had been from any other part of California and he'd been a shade darker, he would have got 10 years. We see, Georgia just passed didn't strike down a law. It's legal to take underskirt pictures. Yeah. In Oklahoma, it's legal to, and this is where I have to put the explicit tag on now, we're going to put your penis in the mouth of a drunk, unconscious woman. That's not illegal. I shouldn't say it's legal. I should say it's not illegal. All of these things are still systematically entrenched. So it's not like it's cultural. It's part of the law. They're not going to get punished for this. What improvements have you seen? Because you travel all over the world. Mm-hmm. You're not just you're doing military bases in Japan. You just came back from Germany. You're all over the place. What improvements have you seen so at least some of us can sleep a little bit better tonight knowing that not only is Mike doing good, but the world is getting a little better?
That we're having this conversation. 20 years ago, shows we're not having this conversation. We're not discussing this topic. That alone is huge. 2, awareness now is a given. The problem is we need the behaviors to match the awareness. 20 years ago, there wasn't even awareness. If I went in front of an audience 20 years ago and said, a person who's drunk, can they give consent? A person who's drunk and not of sound mind or incapacitated, can they give consent? Audience would say, well, of course they can. Now you walk in front of an audience, they outright know, well, of course they can't. The problem is you say, all right, do we live by that? No, we don't. Okay, so we've raised awareness. That's a positive. Now we need the behavior to catch up with the awareness. A lot of laws have been changed for the better. So while some are archaic and incredibly harmful and degrading, many have changed greatly for the better. I mean, Saturday Night Live had a skit 2 decades ago about Antioch College and having to ask before you engage in some kind of intimacy, and they mocked the whole concept. And nowadays, that's a concept that's being taught. So we've grown, and we can say we can be mature enough to teach this, where back then they were so primitive almost just 20 years ago on talk to your partner. All right, don't be ridiculous. By the way, if you're listening around now going, that is ridiculous, think about how ridiculous that sounds. That talking to your partner before engaging in sexual intimacy is asking too much. How immature is that sexual relationship that you can't have that conversation? These are big leaps and bounds. The fact that survivors have places they can come forward to now and be supported, that is a great improvement. And I can keep going on and on because we are seeing massive improvements. We still have a long ways to go. But how many people I get to meet who saw our work 5 years ago We had somebody in a recent tour when I was in Singapore and Japan. 3 days in a row, somebody approached us who had seen us 4, 5, and 13 years ago and changed their relationship, their approach to sexuality and sexual intimacy and sexual decision-making that is still true in their life today. That is a sign of people want to do the right thing when you give them the right skill set. They want to live their life the right way. We just got to do it on a wider, bigger scale.
Well, the book is Can I Kiss You? It's available today. It came out yesterday, and I wanted to make sure we timed it to get you as much exposure as possible because you know how much I appreciate and love what you do, Mike. Where can people find it besides that, and where can they learn more about you?
Well, awesome. Thank you, Craig, for doing this, by the way. Your support has always been greatly appreciated. They can definitely find it on Amazon, and it is Can I Kiss You? It's just what it says, so it's really easy to find. You'll find the white cover. You'll see the orange writing, Can I Kiss You? It's in both paperback and Kindle, so they can choose either one they want. If they want to learn more about us or they want to get a special bundle that we might offer on the book, they can go to our website, and that's datesafeproject.org. So Date Safe Project. You're on a date, you want to feel safe, and you don't want to feel like it's a project. datesafeproject.org. And they'll find everything about our work, our books, our materials, our programs for universities, for school systems, for parents, our DVD, whatever they need, it's on there.
Well, I really appreciate what you do, and I look forward to seeing you in October when I get to Milwaukee.
Awesome, Craig. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for having me back on.
That's the show. Thanks as always to Michael for coming on. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes. Leave a review there if you could. It would really help get the show out there. You can follow the podcast on Twitter @RealityCheckPod, as well as like the podcast Facebook page. Any comments, questions, or guest suggestions, go to Craig at SpeakerCraigPrice.com. See you next week with my normal voice.